Good afternoon, board members, staff, members of the community. Let the record show that today is July 7th. The time is 3 p.m. and we will now call the Amherst County Board of Supervisors meeting to order. Is there a motion to approve the agenda? Motion on the floor by Ms. Moore. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
That is no. The agenda is now approved. We will now stand for the invocation to pledge allegiance. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the rain that the county has received, for the crops, for the farmers and the livestock. Our Heavenly Father, we ask that you protect our members of the military, our members of public safety, our local sheriff's department. We ask that you guide and protect the first responders, the people in the hospitals that are taking care of the sick. Dear Lord, we've got many people in our community that are suffering, whether it be with health issues, behavioral health issues, financial issues. We ask that you guide them, protect them, and keep them in your hand. Dear Lord, give this board the wisdom to make good decisions for the betterment of this county. In your name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, we will now open up the meeting for citizen comment. Is there anyone here wishing to speak? Anyone here wishing to speak? All right, sir, please come forward.
All right, is there any way I could just speak from here?
Can you take that over? There we go.
I
Yes,
just
you
can't,
can, as a matter of fact.
I can't stand too long.
All right, sir, we'll just need you to give us your name and your address.
All right, it's Brian Hammock, and I live at 180 Hemlock
You have to
Trail.
hold that up to your mouth, okay?
Here, I'll hold it for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Willis.
Yeah, my name's Brian Hammock, and I live at 180 Hemlock Trail. I've been a resident here almost 40 years. Anyway, I got a letter from Kay Rowe, Chief Deputy Treasurer Collections, about my property tax on my property. And this goes back quite a few years to Gary Friend when he was treasurer, and I can't remember the last lady. Mr. Ayers knows a little bit of the background, but he knows a couple years ago, he referred me to, I believe it was the last treasurer, but it's a long story and in depth, but I've tried to address it, but I just didn't appreciate the tone of this letter. Citing Code of Virginia 58-3965, in my opinion, to strong arm me about taxes that I owe that are in dispute. In my opinion, I know a little bit about realty. I'm a licensed surveyor, and it's crazy. My land depreciated in value, but my overall value has increased, and that's an anomaly in the real estate world. How can you have the land, which has got inherent value, decrease and my total value increase? But anyway, I need someone that can make a decision and stand behind it to get up with me and do the right thing. And I don't want to be adversarial with y'all or nothing, but something ain't right in my case, and it goes back years.
Sir, if you could leave a copy of your paperwork with, you can give it to Ms. Wilkes. Mr. Ayers, is he in your district?
He would be, yes, ma'am.
Okay.
And
If
like I
Mr. Ayers, is it
said,
okay with you if we just take a copy? Maybe we can work with this gentleman and get to the bottom of this, or you?
That's fine. That is fine.
and like I
Right.
said, I've been actively doing this for years with my parents' property and my own, and I don't get around as good as I used to and so forth, but this was dated July 1st, and if you would look up the Code of Virginia, I mean, it states a 30-day notification for any legal actions, and she's citing the 15th.
All right, if you
I
can
mean,
give a
that's-
copy of
that's
that to
against
Ms.
the
Wilkes, and she'll make a
Code of
copy,
Virginia.
well,
That governs this body.
I'll work with the treasurer and the commissioner and see if we can't come to some
And
resolution.
like I said, this goes back to Gary Friend, and I talked to him, so this goes back quite a few years, and they've been, trying to work with me, but.
all right, sir, thank you. We will make copies, and Ms. Wilkes will get
Y'all
back with
should
you.
be able to
Alright.
just contact her and get her to, she works for y'all, doesn't she?
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else here wishing to speak during citizens' comment?
Is there?
What?
One last thing, can I set some kind of date to meet with whoever?
Ms. Wilkes she's very prompt, but she's gonna look at her
Well,
calendar right
I
now.
just wanted something on record, so.
That's fine, she's
You
gonna
know
look
what
at
I'm
her calendar
saying,
right
this has
now.
been a long,
What?
drawn out thing.
Board members, I know this is unusual, and I appreciate your patience.
Well, can you make a decision?
No, I'm gonna work with the other two and try to meet with you and get this.
I've
resolved.
met with people and don't get nothing but lip service. That's why I want someone with a buck stop. And I'm not sure
All right,
how.
Sir, we've gotta stop the citizens' comments now, and move on. Is there anyone else here wishing to speak? Seeing and hearing none, citizen comment is now over, and we will move on to the consent agenda.
Two people.
A motion to approve if there are no concerns.
So moved, Madam
Motion on the floor by Mr. Ayers, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The consent agenda is now approved.
It was Mr. Martin. It was me.
It was such a booming voice, I thought it was Mr. Ayers.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Martin. You're welcome.
We will now move on to ordinances first reading. All 5 of these are on the first reading, as you all know. That just requires, unless there are questions, After we hear them, just a motion to stand. So, who is going to do 2020-001?
Madam Chair, this is Dean Rogers.
Mr. Rogers?
I'm sorry that I can't be there in person for the meeting, but as you all know, I'm self-isolating, waiting for some test results back from a family member. Tyler Creasy is prepared to talk about the first items on the agenda there for the 1, 2, 3, the first 3 ordinances.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Mr. Creasy was on his way up to the mic.
Madam Chair, Board, how are y'all today? In the first ordinance, ordinance 2020-001, this is the Board of Supervisors is being asked to consider modifications to county code relating to buffer zones surrounding the select P1 public lands district. Apparently it's amending section 411 of appendix A to the code of the county of Amherst to address the buffer zones surrounding P1 public lands. In 2015, the Board of Supervisors passed ordinance 2015-001 that eliminated the 200-foot setback for any public land owned by the United States government and managed by the U.S. Forest Services. This code change was made evident in section 804, which describes the setbacks required for each district in the county. However, this change was never made to section 411. Therefore, in order to show conformity throughout the county code, the attached code change to section 411 of the Amherst County Zoning and Subdivision Ordinance would eliminate the 200-foot setback for any public land owned by the United States government and managed by the U.S. Forest Service. The recommended motion is that the board advertise and hold a public hearing on this ordinance amendment in its second July meeting. Any questions for staff?
Board members? Is there a motion?
I move that the board advertise and hold a public hearing on this ordinance amendment at its second July meeting.
Motion on the floor by Ms. Moore. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion is approved. On down to go.
Moving on, ordinance 2020-002 is amending section 803, specifically subsection 803.1, what indicates addresses maximum height restrictions for residential and other uses in the R1 limited residential district. Section 803 currently identifies the maximum height restrictions for residential and other uses within the zoning district. However, it does not indicate a height restriction for other uses in the R1 limited residential district. You can see on the summary sheet a list of, I believe, 14 special exception uses that could be put in the residential district. However, we have no height restrictions for these uses. Therefore, staff proposes a 40-foot height restriction for other uses in the R1 limited residential district to be added to section 803 of the Amherst County Zoning and Subdivision Ordinance. Staff recommends to move that the board advertise and hold a public hearing on this ordinance amendment at its second July meeting. Are there any questions for staff?
Any questions?
Yes, sir. Can you tell me a little bit more about use number 4, emergency services, and how this height restriction might affect that?
That's an exception, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it is, but so what would you consider an emergency services use?
To clarify that, I would probably look up the definition of what we already consider emergency services and go off of that. I'm not entirely sure what that is as of right now.
I'd like for you to research that, because if we're talking about things like towers for a radio system, and then you're limiting it to 40 feet, that could be a detriment. But if you could look at that when you bring the code back to us, that's very helpful.
Of course.
Is there something that prompted this? I mean, what would be an excess of 40 feet that would go in a residential area that's not one of these 14 things?
So as of right now, when we were looking through the code, there's actually a height restriction for every single district besides R1 and other uses, and it says not applicable. So therefore, we were proposing a height restriction. And back in, I was researching in 1982, before this, we actually had a height restriction for the R1 district, which was 40 feet. And therefore, when we changed back in 1982 and had our zoning and subdivision ordinance, it was listed as not applicable. So therefore, we're kind of just moving forward and bringing in a height restriction since it hasn't been applicable, but it used to be. But as of right now, we have not seen any developments in the R1 district for these type of special exceptions. This is just in case we do receive one, that we do have a height restriction.
Okay. Ms. Martin, another question?
So what you're saying is, in the summary is, you say, here are special exception uses potentially allowed in the R1 limited residential district that do not have height restrictions. It is churches and it's 14 uses, right?
Correct.
Staff proposes a 40-foot height restriction for other uses in the R1 limited residential district. So are you proposing a 40-foot restriction for the 14 uses or everything else? Because I don't think we want a neighborhood entrance sign that's 40 feet tall, right?
That's correct.
So I don't have a problem moving forward with this, but I think when you bring it back, we need a lot more information on what the ramifications are.
I understand.
Is staff clear on Mr. Martin's concerns?
Staff is clear.
All right, we need a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that the board advertise and hold a public hearing on this ordinance amendment at its second July meeting.
Motion on the floor by Mr. Martin, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no, motion passes.
Alrighty, moving on. Ordinance 2020-003 is amending section 707, specifically subsection 707.03 of Appendix A of the County Code of the Code of the County of Amherst to allow for dual-use structures limited to single-family dwelling uses and business uses in the B2 General Commercial District. I would also like to make a note that this proposed code change is also to allow for on-site directional signs greater than 18 inches in width and or 42 inches in height. This request is coming before the board. One, Mr. Bill Coffey of the Rosemeyer Corporation is currently going through a site plan process for a self-storage facility in the B2 district. The site plan includes a proposed apartment on site within the storage facility. And we've already told him that that is not a permitted use. However, Mr. Coffey explained that this is part of AA Self-Storage's business model, and then all the other jurisdictions in which they do business, the proposed use is allowed. Therefore, staff received a written request from Mr. Bill Coffey to change the Amherst County zoning and subdivision ordinance, and that is attached, and that is to allow to increase. Let me get the exact wording for you. That is to allow for dual-use structures limited to single-family dwelling uses and business use. As of right now, we have as a permitted use per section 707.02.29, it says single-family dwellings and retail sales and or service stores within the same main structure. So therefore, we're just expanding this, and this will be a special exception in the B2 district. In addition, it is not listed here, and therefore this will coincide with my motion, is to allow for on-site directional signs greater than 18 inches in width and 42 inches in height. Walmart is doing a grocery pickup, and they have stated that per their policy, their on-site directional signs have to be at least 7 feet in height. As of right now, our code only allows for them to be 42 inches in height. So therefore, that code change is proposed. However, the recommended motion is due to an advertisement issue. The board is being asked to table the public hearing until its second meeting in August. Are there any questions for staff?
Madam Chair, I have a few comments. So the first part, this dual-use structure limited to a single-family dwelling, I'm assuming that's like a on-site manager or caretaker, right?
That's correct.
And you'll write the draft as such to make sure that that's. As far as the directional signs greater than 18 inches in width and 42 inches in height, county has a sign ordinance. And I don't see that creating a special exception process to exceed those sign ordinance requirements is a good thing. And I hear all the time where I work that, well, it's our policy, we need this. No, this is the county standard. This is what our ordinance is. That's what it is. So, Madam Chair, while I would support changing for the caretaker's dwelling, I would not support moving forward with changing where we can just carte blanche amend the sign ordinance requirements. Because, it might be 7 feet today, they might come forward with 10 feet next week. So, no. The county needs a standard, and I've been saying this all along since I've come on board. We need to have a standard. We need to create an environment that people want to locate in. And the sign ordinance is one of the ways you do that. Okay? So if they get 42 inches now and 18 inches in width, that's the confines that they need to work. That's just my opinion.
Mr. Martin, how would you, this is for the Walmart pickup, which I know a lot of people are using Walmart pickup now with the pandemic and everything else. So how do we solve for that? For their signs directed to people and to pick up their groceries?
Do you really need a 7-foot tall sign to do that?
Yeah.
Madam Chair, we're proposing this to be a special exception. So any on-site directional signs that would exceed the already minimum standards would come before you as a special exception.
And Walmart is saying that they're all just 7 feet, so rather than make a special sign for Amherst, all their signs are 7 feet. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's what they're saying.
Yes, but I was informed it's actually kind of funny, well, not funny for the individual that happened to, but he was, I guess, walking and he didn't see the sign. I guess it was too low, and he hit the sign, and Walmart was sued. This is what I've been told by them, and so therefore they now have a policy that all signs have to be 7 feet. Take that as you will.
That's interesting. Board members?
I'd like to accommodate Walmart if we can, because they certainly are a big provider of our tax base in this county, no doubt about that. A lot of people are using the pickup and going over to Lynchburg at this point in time and getting groceries in Lynchburg when they could be buying groceries in Amherst County. So I understand what Mr. Martin's saying, but this would be a special exception, and I would say we move forward with the hearing and go ahead and allow this as a special exception.
All right, well, there could certainly be further discussion about this when it comes before us a second time. So, Mr. Pugh, was that a motion?
Well, C, is that correct?
Madam Chair, I move that the board advertise and hold a public hearing on this ordinance amendment as its the second August meeting.
That's correct, due to an advertisement issue.
All right, there's a motion on the floor by Mr. Ayers. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
Nay.
All right, let the record show that we've got 4 ayes and 1 no. No by Mr. Martin.
I have another question regarding your B2. We have a lot of B2 structures on Route 29 through Madison Heights that are residential housing, but many of them are zoned as business, and many of them are empty. I know times in the past we've had trouble, people are buying these properties and would like to live in them. Would this be applicable to maybe some of those locations?
That is a use issue. The use has elapsed. This is to allow for a dual use, to allow for a business other than a retail service store, such as a self-storage facility, or if the guy at Amherst Arms wanted to live in the back of his building, for instance, something like that. But that would not allow for people to come in and to use a structure that not already been established as a residential structure to live there.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler.
Thank you.
Mr. Rogers, who will be speaking to 2020-0009?
I will, ma'am.
All right,
This is a recent change to the state law that allows counties to increase the security fee that is charged by judges when they impose the sentences and so forth and resolve cases. It's 100% increase, it's only $10. So the General Assembly will allow us to increase the courthouse security fee from $10 to $20 when the judge imposes it. And this would be helpful to us because we still have security issues at the courthouse. And this would be very helpful to us. So the proposal is that we simply change our ordinance to increase the fee by $10.
okay. Board members, any questions of Mr. Rogers? Is there a motion?
Madam Chair, I move that the board advertise and hold a public hearing on this ordinance amendment at its second July meeting.
Motion on the floor by Ms. Martin, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
No motion passes, thank you.
Ms. Moore.
What did I say?
Ms. Martin.
Ms. Moore. Mr. Thacker, are you gonna speak to the next ordinance, or Mr. Rogers, are you gonna do that?
I thought I would take care of that.
Okay.
The board has had this discussion at a prior meeting, and so now we're beginning the process of the ordinance change with this first read. So, as you'll recall, the discussion was about making our convenience centers available for people outside the county to drop off waste. We intend to charge a fee for that service, but our current ordinance does not allow waste from outside the county. This request arose from residents that live up near the Boxwood Farms site. As you'll recall, Boxwood Farms is very close to the Nelson border, and there is a housing area up there, and there are people just across the border that would like to continue to use that convenience center. And so this ordinance change is necessary in order for that to take place.
Okay. Board members, any questions?
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chair, or Mr. Rogers. In your comments, you stated that this request really came from residents that lived close to the convenience centers. The proposed ordinance strikes or business. So would a business on the in an adjacent county be able to buy this permit for $100? So we're going to start taking commercial trash?
No, that was never the intent, Mr. Rogers.
Correct.
Yeah.
I don't believe that is intent. That's
That is correct. I
could
mean,
be the
our
result.
permit only allows just household trash. So, I mean, we haven't even gotten that permit changed. I mean, we need to change the ordinance before we approach DEQ. And our intention is not to allow commercial waste at all, but only household trash.
I'd just like for it to be clear, please.
Okay.
Okay, in the language of the ordinance itself?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, and I agree, we've got to make sure that nobody can interpret this as us taking business waste.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Do you have to pull it back in order to make that change, Mr. Rogers? Mr. Lockley?
No, ma'am. Yeah, that's the purpose of the.
Wait a minute, hold on a second, Mr. Rogers. Mr. Lockley's trying to speak.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, same thing that Mr. Rogers did. No, we can just make that change and the text will be slightly different when you see it for the public hearing.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. All right, we need a motion.
So moved. I move that the board advertise and hold a public hearing on this ordinance change with the request that was made by the board at the second July meeting.
All right, motion on the floor by Mr. Martin. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion passes. All right, moving on to new business. Business-friendly tax changes. Ms. Wilkes, are you going to lead us in that discussion?
Mr. Rogers is.
Mr. Rogers is-
I'll put the,
Slides?
I
Okay.
send out the original one.
Yes,
Hold on,
thank
Mr.
you
Wait a
very
minute,
much.
Rogers, we're trying to.
Trying to get your slides up.
Okay, we're having technical difficulties. Let me push some. Here, let me push you, look. Do you remember?
They are, well, you can call up just the PDF file.
Well, I am on my computer, but I was trying to get the screen so I can operate on the table.
It is the second attachment to the board agenda package.
Yeah, we're just trying to get the screen switched.
Yeah, we're like hardware difficulties.
You plugged in? Yeah. Plugged in?
It says, what in their surname?
Well, I don't know how low enough we can read the whole thing.
Source HDMI.
Which is what I got.
I'm plugging it in.
Well, this can be done with the mouse from the podium.
Okay,
All right, let's proceed.
let's just do it that way.
All right, thank you, Dean. We'll just do it this way.
Okay, Madam Chair, if I may, the background while we can get up there and get going. If the board remembers, over a year ago, we began adopting a whole raft of business-friendly ordinance changes following the advice from the EDA and a whole variety of topics. One of those topics dealt with our tax system. And in particular, there was a standing complaint with regard to merchants' capital tax that it would, because it taxed inventory on the first day of the year each year, it would drive businesses to remove their inventory from the county to avoid taxation altogether. And people can remember the days when car dealers would empty out for that first week of January. We also had concerns expressed with regard to business equipment and the way that it was taxed, because we had a sort of a flat tax that continued forever at the same rate, regardless of the fact that the property may be decades old and fully depreciated. So it was requested that we work depreciation into that system. So what we have done now is I'm going to go through the proposals. You saw these last year. We delayed for another year to impose them. And we're really talking about imposition of some of these taxes in the coming January of 21, and some will be applied in July of 21 of next year. So we're way ahead of the curve here. So Stacey, if you can go down to the merchant's capital slide, the second slide. And what we're proposing to do with regard to merchant's capital is to completely repeal it altogether. You can see that Campbell County does not have a merchant's capital tax, neither does Bedford nor Rockbridge County. Appomattox does, and we do, and so our proposal is that we eliminate it completely. The next slide is with regard to machinery and tools. This property is taxed on the 1st of January based on an inventory valuation, and it's valued based upon its original cost. And so you can see how we compare. We're not the lowest, Bedford is the lowest, but we're down there. So our taxes are pretty friendly with regard to machinery and tools. So we're proposing that we make no changes to that tax at all. The next slide is with regard to business license tax, or BPOL. Okay, and BPOL is a tax based upon gross receipts. So we're looking at last year's total sales. A tax is made based on each $100 value of gross receipts. And on this slide, you can see that Appomattox and Bedford do not have a BPOL tax at all. And you can see how we compare against Campbell and Rockbridge. You'll see the big gap there with regard to retail, fuel, and wholesale. These are businesses that we are currently taxing as merchants' capital. Okay, so if we recommend that we eliminate merchants capital, then in order to be fair to all businesses, we need to establish a deep poll tax for our retail and wholesale businesses. And so on the next slide, before we go there, I mean, you can see right now as with regards to Campbell and Rockbridge, the county sits at 13 cents, right between those two counties. So we're not the highest. With regard to personal services, again, we're right between Campbell and Rockbridge. We're not the highest. And professional services, we match Campbell. So again, not the highest, but we're up there. And our proposal is that those values not change. If you go to the next slide, Stacy, and you can now, we're going to look at just Amherst County's current taxes with regard to default and what we propose to be different. And that which we propose to be different is bolded there, is the dark print. Now you kind of got to switch back and forth to the slides up above that we just looked at, but I can tell you that with regard to retail at 20 cents, that will match Campbell County. But it's still a little bit lower than Campbell County because Campbell County does 20 cents per $100 of gross receipts on all gross receipts. And our Commissioner's Revenue was concerned about the small mom and pop shops, those that, you know, have gas pumps out front, for instance. And so they'll sell a lot of gas with, you know, only a margin of a penny or so, and not, so they'll have large gross receipts, but not much in the way of profit. So she wanted to make sure that we don't place a burden on those people. So that's why our tax, while Campbell keeps 20 cents even on gas sales, ours will only be 8 cents on gas sales. And that's on net receipts after state and federal taxes. So we are reaching the gas sales, but this is really friendly for the smaller mom and pop shops. With regard to wholesale at 5 cents, that matches both Campbell and Rockbridge. So we tried hard to not get out in front on taxes, that we're not the leader here, that we are friendly. Now another type of tax, if we can go to the next slide, is business equipment. And that's based on an annual assessed value based upon the original cost. And you can see our how we compare with others. We're slightly above Appomattox. We're like everybody, way above Bedford, but we're below Campbell by quite a bit. And so we are going to switch from just 30% of the asset's value. So they buy the tool at $100, and we then tax it at a value of $30. Well, we propose to change that to tax it at $40 for its first 4 years, and then tax it at only $25 thereafter. So we are reducing it. This was where we had to do the most manipulation to achieve the board's directive to us to make sure that this was revenue neutral. We wanted to apply a lot more depreciation and, you know, allow the depreciation to fall more than it did. But if we did that, we wouldn't be able to achieve the neutrality of revenue. So that's why it's set there. The board can certainly manipulate all of these numbers, but we were reaching for revenue neutral. The next slide is about meals tax. Now this is new. We currently charge a 4% gross receipt for meals, but the General Assembly allowed counties to increase that amount if they wanted to. And our recommendation is that we take our meals tax all the way up to 6%. Okay, and because that will increase revenue, because that, to the extent that a tax is voluntary, that's a voluntary tax. You only pay it when you go out to eat, and it also tends to fall more heavily on people
from outside the county rather than people inside the county. And so it taxes actual consumption and avoids the necessity for an increase in real estate, which is not consumption. So our recommendation is that we take our meals tax to 6%. We do not yet know what the other counties are doing with regard to this. You know, as I said, we're way ahead of the curve here, since we were planning to look at all these things anyway this year. So we don't know what Campbell, Bedford, Rockbridge, or Appomattox plan to do with regard to meals tax, if they're going to take advantage of that. But we do anticipate that this will bring in $500,000 a year of additional revenue. Now, the biggest deal is the next slide with regard to lodging tax. This is also brand new. The General Assembly, oh, no, I'm ahead of myself, I'm sorry. Lodging tax, we're recommending that it stay the same. It's currently 5% of gross receipts. 3% of those 5 is what funds our tourism budget. So that will simply remain the same as it is right now. Now, here's the new one. The next slide, Stacy, please, the cigarette tax. This is what the General Assembly is allowing counties to do now. It takes effect next summer, and we can impose a tax of up to 40 cents a pack. Our recommendation is that we institute a tax of 27 cents a pack and allow 2 of those cents to go to the retailers themselves as an incentive to collect that tax. So we have an estimated 50 retailers selling cigarettes in this county. And so we project our revenue at $1 million and probably higher than $1 million. Stacy can probably tell you the story of Appomattox that had only 13 sellers, and at 25 cents a pack, they brought in $750,000. So at 50 retailers, we're hopeful that that's going to be much larger than that.
How did you all, wait a minute, Mr. Rogers, how did you all arrive at the 27 cents?
So that is,
Well, go ahead, Stacey.
I would say that's what we used in Appomattox as our starting point, and it was such a substantial amount of funds. What I can tell you is that Lynchburg's is much higher. To my knowledge, Nelson has nothing, and I don't foresee anybody leaving the county to go buy what they currently buy.
I was just curious.
Yeah, it just seemed like an average, and more reasonable than snacking 40 cents a pack all at one time.
And it also conveniently, between that and the meals tax, comes up with about $1.5 million of additional income or revenue to the county, which is where our biggest shortfall is in taking care of our capital, our CIP, our capital improvement plan. So if we want to spend about $1.5 million a year, then we need to find that revenue somewhere. Lo and behold, this amount will raise that revenue and take care of that problem for us. So, if now we can go to the next slide, Stacy. How does this change income or revenue to the county? Because we have eliminated merchants capital, that raised $300,000 a year. Machinery and tools, no real effect. Business license, we will be whole, or we add these other businesses in. We set those amounts to raise as close to 300. We're projecting 305. No change to business equipment. Meals tax is that 500 I mentioned, and cigarette tax would be $1 million. So with regard to taxes on businesses, the merchant's capital and the business licensing, this is revenue neutral as the board requested. So the net effect is with these tax changes that are really based on consumption, we are capturing $1.5 million of recurring revenue that is not currently being used for operations. Staff suggestion for the board is that this money, this $1.5 million, be dedicated to the future fund, which is how we fund the CIP and how we where we collect our savings each year to be used for the CIP. With that, the floor is open for questions. But what we would like to do next is simply have the board's concurrence that this is acceptable. And if it is, then we will simply move forward with the process of going through the public notice and the public hearings that are required to institute these new taxes in time for them to occur, which would be January and then July of next year.
Right,
So
now,
we're really just looking for the board to give us their approval to move forward.
thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Rogers.
ma'am.
Board members, questions? Nothing? All right, do we need a motion to direct staff?
We would like that, please.
Hold on.
Madam Chair, I move that the board direct staff to proceed with the legal process required to implement the proposed tax changes.
Motion on the floor by Mr. Martin, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no, motion passes. Thank you, Ms. Rogers, thank you, Ms. Wilkes, for all your work on this. All right, next we have CARES Funding Act budget.
There is a slide presentation for this, so I'll wait for Stacy to pull that up.
Get up. Board members, this is, I went through the meeting yesterday with staff. This is, and I know that Mr. Rogers has talked to each of you. I mean, this is gonna really resemble what we do in our budget work. So this is, it's a first for all localities, and certainly a first for us, but it's gonna require a lot of thought. Unfortunately, there are time restrictions on these funds, so we will need to make some big decisions fairly quickly. All right, Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, ma'am. Stacy, if you could just go to the second slide, the total county funding. Members of the board, the federal government gave us $2,566,000 and change to respond for COVID relief. And we have been studying the rules that have been published so far with regard to how this money can be spent. And I can tell you that the rules continue to change. They evolve, they get more precise in some areas and looser in other areas. But in order to be responsive to whatever has occurred in our county, we are attempting to move quickly to deploy this money to get it out to businesses and people. Your role in this discussion, as Madam Chair just alluded to, is much like our normal budget discussions. We're going to show you an allocation of how we would divide this money up and what we'd apply it to, and we need you to decide whether that's how you want it done. And we're going to give you a list of projects that this money could be spent on, and we need you to tell us if those are the projects you want it spent on. These are the projects that we have identified follow the rules and meet the funding requirements. And we have searched wide and broad for as many projects as we can that could qualify. Your role in that too is decide where should government be directing these efforts. Okay, so just for the next slide, Stacy, the basic way the money can be expended, the categories sort of that we've been given are, we can use the funds to pay our actual COVID expenses. That money that we have spent so far to date, and Ms. Wills has been keeping track of all of that, so I'll show you those numbers here in a second. we can repay ourselves for that money. The next category is that we can give money away. We can create grant programs for businesses, for nonprofits, and even for individuals to help them deal with the expenses that they have incurred in reacting to the pandemic. We'll get into those grant programs here in just a second. Other qualifying projects, you'll see on the list of projects a whole variety. They seem to jump all over the place, but in fact, they fall into one of these three categories. They're hygienic, they assist in teleworking within the county, or they assist with social distancing in businesses and here in county government. So all of our projects fall into one of those three categories. Here of late, just the last week or so, we learned that it is possible to use this money to pay salaries for our public safety staff and for sheriff's deputies between now and the end of the year. And so it's entirely possible to do that. Now, of course, we already have money budgeted for that, but we can switch this money in and use that, and that means we can switch our salary money out and use that for any way that we would like. We're going to refer to that as the salary switch. So while there are rules on how we can use the federal COVID money, there are not rules on how we use our own money that we don't need to expend. So that's worth keeping in mind. We'll get to that at the end of this. Okay, so the next slide shows the reimbursement that we want to, well, the money we've spent so far to date, and we would like to reimburse ourselves. So, believe it or not, with more people staying home, I think you'll recall there's been a lot more issues with the landfill and convenience centers. People have been emptying out their basements and garages, and it's required a lot of extra time at the landfill and so forth. And so we've incurred comp time that we would like to pay off rather than give people the time off. Other COVID-related costs deal with PPE and other supplies from public safety that we've purchased for the various offices in the county. And finally, the animal shelter septic system, with all the additional hand washing and washing that's required for COVID, needs significant repairs to upgrade it. So, and keep it in service. So we believe that these will qualify as reimbursable COVID expenses that we would draw from that $2.5 million. The next slide deals with grant programs. Now, the board does not have to issue grants at all. I mean, you can use this money in any way you want. So this proposed allocation of funds is simply staff's way to divide up the entire $2.5 million and find a place for all of it that qualifies under all the different categories. So the first category is small business grants, and in your board package is a regulation that we have met on and debated over and come up with a set of rules that we know follow the federal requirements, but then are tailored to serve our community. And in fact, really to help local businesses. So businesses that are locally owned and operated can receive more grant funds than those that are from outside the county, and so forth. And hopefully you've had a chance to go through all the rules in there. Likewise, we have set up a body of rules for the nonprofits in the county. Our logic is that while they're not there paying taxes, they are there providing community services, and they are valuable members of the community. And we want to make sure that they are also given some assistance because they will also have been hurt by the COVID restrictions. Finally, it's possible to us to give individuals grants for those that were unable to pay their mortgage or their rent or unable to pay their utility bill. And we've set up a system of rules for those. I'm not going to go through those rules, and you certainly can. I don't know that it's necessary that you get into those weeds. But what's important at this juncture is that you see how much we set aside. So $1.2 million out of the $2.5 million is a total giveaway. You should know that with regard to small business grants, that the EDA has been received a grant from DHCD as a community development block grant of about $560,000 that they can give away to businesses too. Theirs is a bit more restrictive, and it's a bit harder to meet their requirements, and so we've written ours to be a bit looser. So our plan is to have our finance department accept the grant applications and make sure that all the requested information is present, and then the grant will be sent over to the EDA executive director, and she will have a group to assist her in deciding the amounts of the grants to be awarded up to various limits based upon the size of the business. My point in mentioning this is that, so there's $1 million between the two of us set aside for small businesses. With regard to individual grants, you may have read in the newspaper how the governor in the last week or so has approved his own statewide $50 million program to assist individuals with their rent, mortgage, and utilities. We are attempting to make contact with the nonprofit that has been designated to issue those grants. Our goal is to work it in such a way that they will pay first, and if their rules make it difficult to assist people, then they will come to us. Or if they run out of money too quickly, then we would apply our money towards those individual grants. But that's the amount that we're suggesting that you allocate toward those giveaway programs.
Mr. Rogers.
The next one, oh, go ahead.
1 minute. I think this, okay, just so everybody understands, this is what Amherst got, in addition to EDA. The Amherst County School System got yet another pot of money. Sweetbriar got another pot of money. Did I miss any pots?
Where'd you find the tree at that it all came from?
That's not a tree, it's a printing press.
I would say your pockets later.
It just comes out of thin air.
Yeah, electron.
But is that right, Mr. Rogers, at the school? Did I just describe that correctly?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
There's a lot of money flying around. And so staff is simply trying to follow the rules and show you all the different places where you can spend it. You'll see when we get to the end that we're spending more than we have. That's mostly because our estimates are high. We have no idea whether we need $500,000 in nonprofit assistance or $500,000 even in business assistance on top of the EDA. We just don't know, but we're setting money aside toward that. But Ms. Wilkes has identified a method, the salary switch, whereby none of this money will be lost. If we don't spend up to the limit, we can still recapture that money and have it available for our own general fund.
Mr. Rogers, did I understand that churches in Amherst County also could apply for that nonprofit money?
Yes, ma'am, they're a nonprofit. For the most part, what businesses and nonprofits are going to do is they're going to compare their revenues during this COVID period with their revenues from last year. And if their revenues are 10% or more below, then they can, based upon they can justify their loss And we have several levels based upon the size of the business. And let's say that they lost $30,000 compared to last year, and they only qualify for a grant of $10,000. Well, what we would do is we have rounds, and so in the first round they would get $10,000. But then if we then have money left over, we'll put another round of grants out, and they can get another $10,000. If there's money left over, they can go for a third round and get the full amount. But once they recover the amount that they show that they have lost, then they're not entitled to any further under our system. And hopefully that's clear in the regulation that we wrote. So that being said, we're trying to spread it as broadly across the community as we can. And then if we can reach across everyone who's been harmed, then we'll go deeper to try to help those that were hurt worse. And that is our logic behind the system that we set up. Now, that's only $1.2 million out of the 2.5. If we go to our other qualifying projects, this is where we propose that we can spend money on projects that actually qualify for COVID money. And these dollar figures, like our regular budgeting process, are just estimates. This is all happening so fast, we don't have time, we didn't have time to go out for bids and figure out what it'll cost. But for the most part, things in here deal with, actual supplies, hygiene, teleworking, and social distancing. And one of the biggest number that you'll see in here, which applies to teleworking, is $1 million. So we're taking $1 million out of our 2.5 and trying to apply that toward broadband. And now we don't have our normal justification sheets for all of these, so that you all can read about what they are. But between Stacy and I think we can answer questions about what each of these items are and why they qualify. But that's where we would spend the money, or at least allocate it. Now, I don't know that we will spend the full $100,000 for laptops and software and other things that allow us to work from home. I don't know that we'll be able to spend $1 million toward broadband and meet those requirements. One of the requirements is that the money be spent by the end of the year. By 30 December, we have to have received the benefit, received the goods, the services, whatever it is that we're purchasing to achieve, we need to have that in place by the end of the year. That's an incredibly difficult thing, to spend this much money and get the final product in less than 6 months. But use the salary switch, we'll be able to hang on to that money and continue on beyond December 30th. Just to speed through to the end before we get back to questions, the next slide, Stacy, shows that after we purchase all of those qualifying projects, there'll be $1.3 million. No. Let's see. No, those are our grant programs and our reimbursed expenses. So the first two items I showed you were the things we've already expended that we want to be reimbursed for, and then our grant program. Okay, that's 1.2 plus change, another 100,000. That's 1.3. Our other qualifying projects, that list of projects I just showed you, that's 1.6. Okay, so together we're already over 2.5. And as I mentioned, the salary switch allows us to carry the money past 30 December. I don't know that I need to explain that any further. That's the following slide where it says, can we spend all of the funds? And the answer is, it's hard to spend that much in that short time, but we will be able to spend them all because of the salary switch, because we can apply it to save money that's already in our budget. We can pull that money out of the budget and it will last one more fiscal year. It's not recurring money, it's just, we'll be able to use it one time.
Mr. Rogers, I didn't see anything on here for the service authority. Did-
Okay,
did I
go,
miss
Stacy,
something?
go back.
It's right
Oh,
here.
there you
Go back.
are, okay. All right, I see it now.
Okay, that's the service authority renovation. You know, now, the reality is, I mean, these are projects that we believe will satisfy the COVID requirements, the federal COVID requirements. But because of the salary switch, the truth is, almost anything on our CIP, currently on our CIP, we could use this money toward. In fact, if you look closely at the project list, many of these items were already in our CIP. Monroe hot water, the Outlook, the duct cleaning, software is always in there. And so those things were already on our capital improvement plan. And so we're trying to, but they do qualify for COVID money. So one of the things that we don't have a sense for is how closely the board wants to stay true to the COVID response use of the money, or do you want to apply it toward other things that you think are more needful than the things on that list? So, to go to the nearly the last slide, this is sort of what's before you now. Which do you want to do grant programs? Which projects do you want? And the numbers that we set aside are just our way to spread it across all the categories. If you remove categories or not, I mean, you can change how much we set aside for each. And then, should leftover funds be applied toward other items in the capital improvement plan? And then finally, we'll get to later on in today's meeting, we need to move very quickly with regard to broadband and other things. So we are looking at this and hopeful that you will make a decision today.
All right, Mr. Rogers,
so
hold on just a second. Mr. Pugh's got a question.
Yeah, it's about this salary switch. I'm having trouble understanding exactly what you're saying with that. Can you elaborate on exactly how that works?
Yes, sir. Okay, so we have this money for a specific purpose. Turns out that one of the purposes is to pay salaries. Well, we've already budgeted to pay our own salaries. So that means if we use this money, if we use COVID money to pay our salaries, we don't have to use the revenue we've already budgeted to pay that. We don't have to use our own money to pay our own salaries. We can use the COVID money. That frees that money up to be used for anything we want, because that is our money. It does not have any COVID restrictions. So we're simply switching COVID money for our own money and then using our own funds to spend however we like.
Or say, or do whatever we can afford?
Yes, sir.
Or not spend it and put it back into our reserve that has been going down dramatically. I'm just trying to figure this out, but you've got a list of priorities too on here that talks about hot water from Monroe, 50,000. So if we do a salary switch, that none of that would apply. Is that right?
Well, our no. I mean, there's several different ways to do the salary switch. One is to do the salary switch up front, and that's worth about $1.2 million. So if we paid our salaries up front, then we've got $1.2 million to spend as we please without any restriction. The other way is to do the salary switch at the end.
Wait a minute, Mr. Pugh just had to leave. Hold that thought. We had two board members that have stepped out.
And it just filled it right there, and I was like. So.
That's what I'm saying. This thing is discussion.
All right, Mr. Rogers, we'll get everybody back.
So.
Oh, okay, then now just to finish that thought was, what we're proposing to do, assuming that you wanted to do COVID-related projects, to use the sort of the salary switch at the end. So that money, which is not spent on the projects you want it spent on, because they came in under budget or they didn't cost as much as we thought, those projects, we will recover that money through the salary switch and carry it into the next fiscal year for you to use as you please.
All right, thank you. Board members, when I first heard about all this, aside from the fact it was just a boatload of money, one of the things that bothers me is that they're giving us a lot of money and we're being forced to spend it very quickly. And I don't like that. I think that there's room for all kinds of things to go wrong. The one thing I saw about, and I don't like the term salary switch, but anyway, doing it that way is it allows us to be very deliberate and thoughtful about what we want to spend that money on, rather than rushing to spend everything by the end of December. That's the one advantage I saw in this.
I agree with that. So, Mr. Rogers, a 2.5 on this book, is this less didn't we have to send part of this to the town?
If that's been set aside.
So that's been taken out, okay. So are the only, salaries that we can use public safety and law enforcement?
Yes, I had a webinar a week and a half ago, and the U.S. Treasury Council was on there and said this is the exception to the rule. Anything that's budgeted doesn't qualify normally, but they said public safety and sheriff's deputies that are on the road are considered to be mitigating COVID at all times, and that they're the exception to the rule.
And about, how much is that?
1.2 million roughly
1.2 million.
for 6 months, yeah. This has been a big question that's been out there since the money came out. I have another meeting tomorrow, I'm sure we'll discuss it, but I've noticed on my GFOA that a lot of people are jumping on board and making this salary switch.
Yeah, I mean.
For the same reason, to free up their general fund.
I know what you're saying, we're really offsetting the salaries. I know you're calling.
So it becomes one-time money in your general fund that you can use however you feel, whereas this money is very, I won't say very restricted, but the time constraint, the 6 months in the government world is not a lot of time to get stuff done. And
That's right, but I also think I'm starting to sound like Mr. Key, but I think we could also save some of this.
Sure.
Right, put in our reserve. Because, one of the reasons we were looking at a tax increase last year was because we weren't building our reserves up fast enough to pay for future capital projects, right? So we could at least take a portion and say, of this funding that we're going to picture offset or whatever, we're just gonna put it over here in section, right?
You could do that, yes.
Right.
You
So that
could
might
do it on the
be-
front end, you could do some of these projects and do what's left over on the back end, whatever you all as a board feels important.
So that's one thought. Also, when we were talking about the EDA grant, I don't believe that you have received that yet, is that correct?
No, they have not.
Okay,
It's pending approval by the governor right now.
understood. So I definitely want to support our small businesses, and I definitely want to support our nonprofits. But I definitely think there needs to be some defined criteria, really defined criteria before we go basically giving away a bunch of money. You know, we need to see those receipts. And I also think that if there's a business that has laid off employees, right? Unless they're bringing them back to work, I don't think we should be giving them a grant, okay? Because basically you're just, you know, you're offsetting their profit loss, but what about the employees that aren't working? So I really think we need to look at all of those things before we go giving a lot of money away.
Okay, so we did set those parameters within the, right, Mr. Rogers, you interrupt me if you need to. I don't want to speak on turn here. We did set those parameters. We set, we're asking for profit, loss, and sales. We're not asking them, we are asking how many employees they have. We're not asking for receipts unless they want, it depends on which way they go with it, because if it's just their loss of revenue, their 10% loss of revenue, then that's what we're replacing. As far as the individuals, we set up a program before the governor came out with his program. And my knowledge of Interfaith Outreach tells me that they are a very strong nonprofit that vets the needs, and they are the ones that are supposed to be vetting for the region for the governor's program. We were only going to cover rent and utilities for them. In my discussion with DSS, which was our original intention to do that with, she says she hasn't had a need yet, really a strong need, because the people are receiving unemployment plus their stimulus checks. They got more money now than they had before. And so she hasn't had requests for that kind of help as of right now. With the plan, I don't know how strict you want to get with it. We set the business ones are set to share their mortgages if that's what they want to cover. But
Board
really,
members, in your package is a regulation that sets out each of the different paragraphs, the rules on how we would distribute the money. And given the fact that this didn't cost us anything, we were not real tight on getting into the weeds. If they could show a loss, if they could show damage, then we would help them recover that.
Oh, it might not be
But
costing.
those rules are there before you. If you want to make them more restricted, you can. We just didn't want to be unprofitable servants and withhold from others that which was given to us.
It might not be costing us now, but it's gonna cost somebody in the long run. This money is not free. Somebody's gonna have to pay for it down the road, okay? It might look free today, but taxes are going up somewhere down the road. On the federal level or state level.
I think what he's trying to say is we were given it, we may as well use it. We didn't really
I get
ask for
that.
it.
So, which brings me to my next point. The only thing I see public safety related, right, on here, if you go back, there it is.
The shelter, which is actually
The shelter
$20,000
system.
more.
Yeah, and the sheriff department telework.
PPE, I guess you could say.
All right, so let's call it, he said it was actually 20 more thousand than that, so 80,000.
80,000 for the shelter, the DPW.
100,000, and the sheriff department at 1 point, so 100.
130,000 of it. Broadband, well, it's not all just public safety in that it is also to meet teleworking and social distancing needs. And hygiene, and so the duct cleaning,
I could buy into that piece. My point is those guys have been out there consistently, okay? Are there big ticket items coming up next year that maybe we could use to offset, or are there medic unit needs, or?
so we buy medic units once a year, correct, Sam? Because we get a grant once a year, normally.
We applied for a grant.
We apply, we've got, I've been here 4 years, we haven't not gotten it yet.
Does the grant pay entirely?
It pays for almost half,
Half.
about half, yeah.
Of what, $500,000?
Analysts about 254, that doesn't
Yeah.
include the equipment on it. You're looking at $455,000 for my maintenance on the road. Something's gonna last 10 years.
My point is, there's a lot of things with this piece. Right?
Absolutely, if you do the salary switch, it would free up that money to do that. A medic unit doesn't qualify for COVID.
It's
It does cost, which is silly. But
I know.
For some of the offset. And the broadband is an entirely different topic.
Yeah, I don't know if the broadband's even feasible on that short of notice. I would agree with Mr. Martin that we should take some of this money and set it aside for future use. We got beat on the brow over and over again leading up to this point about how we were running out of funds. We didn't have enough in our reserve. There's no way we can continue to buy the capital that we need. And lo and behold, here's our chance to put a little bit of that money away and to add a little bit more to our unobligated reserve. And I think we should do that. I think it'd be prudent, and it would help us in the long run dealing with our future capital needs and possibly staving off future tax increases.
And just as a reminder, if I may, Madam Chair, the board's already decided to go forward with the cigarette tax and the meals tax increases. Well, that is $1.5 million of recurring revenue that will be going into those funds every year. So in a sense, you have resolved that issue. And I'm not suggesting that you don't want to build up your reserve even bigger, but you're really in a safe place with regard to the future now with that cigarette tax.
Well, Mr. Rogers, this is a point of clarification. The board decided to move forward with advertising for public hearing. No one should leave this meeting tonight thinking that we raise those taxes, right?
That's right.
Because I can guarantee you this chamber is going to be full to talk about meal tax probably. So, yeah, I mean, I think for speculation or discussion, we could count on that money, but I think Mr. Pugh's actually right. Maybe we should set aside this for rainy day to offset future tax increases.
So, Madam Chair, if I may, we have $2.5 million that we need to spend by December 30th. If we do the salary switch, we spend $1.2 million. Is that correct?
Right. Because the other was for the grants and the others.
And that leaves $1.3 million that we need to decide whether we're gonna spend on grants or do these other qualifying projects. We gotta spend it.
Okay, so if you do the salary switch and it leaves you 1.3, about 100,000 needs to go to expenses that have already been paid or are anticipated to be paid for ongoing hygiene, like wipes and face masks and different things like that. So we've done a lot of like plexiglass hanging and that kind of thing that we've already paid for. So that's why I separated those out, because that comp time's already been paid because we had to pay it out.
So we still need to decide, it sounds like
Yes.
general consensus among the board to do the salary switch.
Well, my motivation for the salary switch is so that if we were going to spend money, we weren't trying to do it quickly. If we're not going to spend money, and we're just going to put it in a savings account, I don't know that it makes any difference then.
But we
Well,
can't put this.
That's the point. I mean, if we use the 1.2 to offset the salaries, right, there's no rush to spend that $1.2 million on anything, right? that just leaves the remaining money, which is essentially tied up in grants. Correct? The 500.
Yes,
The grants to the private.
Can I say
nonprofits.
this? Some of these projects on here are because, like the service authority, unless Bob's done something differently, you don't have good social distancing in your office right now, right?
We're doing it, but it's limited what we can do, but it's a very small room.
Right, but like you had plexiglass or partitions or whatever,
Yeah.
yeah, things like that that are almost feeling like necessary, like the Monroe hot water. There's no hot water in the bathrooms at the Monroe building. Like, that's really a need to get them sanitary. I guess,
That's $3,500.
But that's
I guess what I'm trying to
also-
say that I mean, these are on the supplemental budget, and they get or they get funded.
Right, but those things, that what I'm hearing you say is that they could be COVID related, right?
Yes, all this stuff is COVID related.
They could also come out of the 1.2 or 3 that's left, correct?
If you did the salary switch,
Yes.
yes.
So if you use the 1.2 to offset the salary, right, that 1.2 doesn't have to be spent. You're left with about 1.3 million that you want to put entirely into grants for businesses, nonprofits, and individuals, right?
Well, yeah, and then another 60, 70 for this other expenses.
Okay. So some or all of those expenses right there come out of that money, right? So you could reduce the amount of grants.
Yes, sir, you can.
Because I don't know if we're gonna be able, are we really gonna be able to put out $1.3 million in grants in qualifying expenses? Do you know that? Does the EDA have a pulse on that?
But see, to me, that's, if you look at it from a process, that's what we have to decide first. Do we want to do these 3 buckets of grants? And if we do we want it to be that amount? And from what I'm hearing here, there's some serious concern that it's too much.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Ayers.
I think we all fail to realize we're not out of the storm yet. There is no prediction when we will come out of the storm. It's been talked about to do salary switch, which I'm in agreement, and that basically frees up $1.2 million. That leaves somewhere about 1.3. My suggestion, and only mine, is that we do such, that we do the salary switch and then set that $1.2 million aside. Don't designate it, allocate it for anything right now, because we don't know where we'll be 3 months, 6 months, a year and a half from now. It's based on what we're seeing today. We are nowhere, doesn't appear to be out of this storm yet. So that would, to me, be just a little safeguard that we could set aside for right now. Then look at things such as the hot water. I agree. There's things that we need to do that could be tied to COVID-19. We need to go ahead and do that, and then from that decide what are we going to do in grants. Are we going to set that whole 1.3 in grants, or set that 1.2 aside to see what we're facing with down the road, dealing with the issues that may come out of COVID-19 continuing? Is it going to be another $2.5 million of federal money we're going to be smacked with in 6 months? We don't know that. We have no idea whether we're going to get another dime to deal with what we may be faced with down the road. So I think we need to do a little preparation for what we don't know.
And that's a very logical way forward, because if we set the 1.2 aside and say, okay, we're not going to touch it right now, but that's freed up to use whatever we want to use it for, right? As you know, it could be this year, it could be next year, it could be whenever we choose to use that. If you then use the remaining 1.3, set aside a portion of that for grants, set aside a portion of it to do some of these projects or whatever, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Then if we get down to the point where, we come in and say, this business grant and the nonprofit grant has been very successful and it's been helping, okay, come back to the board. And then if we determine we want to, we could in turn use part of that 1.2, right? Also, it's kind of like, okay, board, here's $2.5 million. You got to decide how you're going to spend it today. And I'm not sure that's very responsible. So that's just where I'm at.
Mr. Rogers, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we felt the same way.
Yeah,
It kind of felt like it was being shoved at us and with no guidance, really. It changes every day.
Madam Chair, might I address, the issue?
Sure.
There's a downside to this strategy, and that is you're assuming we can spend 1.3 by the end of the year. If you take 1.2 and set it aside, that means we have to spend by 30 December, $1.3 million. For instance, if we set aside $500,000 for business grants, and then we only get, say, $100,000 or $200,000 worth of business grants, and we're then at the end of the year with $300,000 left in that pot, that money goes away. That money is gone. We've lost the use of it. This is why we proposed the idea of picking the projects that you definitely want to have. We'll spend the money that we need to get that. And really, you need to pick at least $1.3 million worth of projects so that at the end, if we didn't spend the full 2.5 or the full, that's what we would use the salary set off, the salary switch for, because we weren't able to spend it all in time. So while it's nice to set it aside, and I think we should go forward with the intention that we are going to have a lot set aside, it would be very useful for the board to identify 1.3 million that you know we can spend by the end of the year. Because if we can't, we'll lose it. And it's in 6 months, that's a hard thing for us to do. I mean, David's got to go fast on all of these projects. You got to go out for bids. You got to get, and you got to announce it. You got to give people time to respond, and so forth. And then if you wanted to add the broadband, we haven't even gotten to that discussion yet. That could spend all of the money. That's the problem you wanted to fix. But we can't spend it. I don't think we can spend it all in 6 months. We're not even sure where we need to spend it at this point. So I just wanted to make that point. I understand setting it aside is wise for the future, but if you set aside that, then you have to be sure you're going to spend the rest or you're going to lose it. We don't want to lose money that we don't have to lose. That's all I have.
But you're still, even if you set the 1.2 million aside and we set it in reserve, it's still going to be there. The 1.3 still has to be spent. Right?
Right.
So we still got to decide on the 1.3. The 1.2 is a moot point, right? Is it? Am I correct?
Well, I guess,
so we got to figure out how to spend the 1.3 million.
Look, I just spend the money. You can't get around not spending money. I've thought about it too. See how you get around not spending money.
But you can still put the 1.2 million aside.
Or you lose it.
No.
I suggest that you give us at least $1.5 million worth of projects. Because we're not going to spend all of it. We're going to try to get good prices. Give us $1.5 million worth of projects, and we'll try to come in at 1.3. But if you give us $2 million worth of projects, we'll still try to come in at 1.3. Because then we'll know at the end of the year how much of the salary we need to set off. Because we weren't able to spend that much. But we should be trying to spend most of it.
Well, 1.2 will be spent on the salaries, so that will be gone. That will be spent. So that leaves you with 1.3 million.
Right.
Yeah.
I think what the confusion here is you're using the roughly 1.2 million in grants, right, as the uncertainty in all of this, right?
Correct.
And you're saying, okay, well, if we really didn't give out all those grants, we'll just use the salaries to offset that, so we can in turn go out and do all these things, right? And I think what I'm hearing, at least from a couple of us, is no, we're going to set 1.2 million aside because that is a qualifying expense. That leaves 1.3 divvy that 1.3 up between the grants and these projects right here.
Right, that's what I'm hearing you say.
And then at the end of the year, or as we go through this process, if the grants are very successful and there's a demonstrated need for it, if the board decides so, we could go into that 1.2 billion to use it for that. If not, that money's already been set aside in a reserve fund for future things.
I agree with that. I think that's a good approach. I'd like to see us do that.
So your direction is to do the 1.2 in salaries, and now you all need to decide what you want to use the 1.3 for. And I realize that we have 1.2 up there in grants, but that, as you said, is up to you all what that amount is. But I need a total, and people, like, the bidding process needs to start if you all want to do some of these projects, that kind of thing.
Guys, that's just my suggestion, y'all, please.
I'm supportive, Mr. Martin, I'm supportive of that. I'm supportive of that, setting that 1.2 aside, leaves us 1.3. If you want to, we can allocate, split that in half, and utilize part of that with grants and take the other half and decide here in those grants, probably by November 1 or November 15th, if there's still funding that has not been utilized from those, we probably need to come together and decide that excess funding that wasn't utilized for grants, where do we want to apply that based on this need list that's presented here.
Sounds like a motion to me.
Well, if I might summarize, Madam Chair, in our list, where we've got to come up with, $2.5 million worth of expenditures, number one is 1.2 million for salary. Okay, now we need to keep adding to that list until we get to our full 2.5. So we've got the first item on the list, salary.
Mr. Aaron,
Item of grant. What kind of grant, what amount do you want to set aside, or do you not want to do grants at all?
My recommendation is we split the 1.3 in half, which would be about 650,000 in grants available, and then the other 650 we can apply to this list, these lists that's presented here today.
How would you want them broken up? We have 3 different grants.
That's based on what you all, let staff make a recommendation as far as what they feel the needs would be and how to do that 650 up in the grants.
You take those 3 and then use 650 for all 3, that's what he's saying. So,
Yeah, I think.
well, because I think that it's really important that you all appropriate it.
So 250, 250, and 100.
Okay, so I'm good with that. I mean,
I'm fine with it. I mean, I'm fine with that. Then take the remaining 650 and go ahead and look at this list and figure out what in this needs list. But I would also, in that grant program, make it through a deadline so that as we get toward the end of the year, once they reach the deadline, if this funding is still available, then we can allocate that, whatever's left toward this needs list as well.
Can we, before we go there, I think the big thing that's later on the agenda is this broadband issue, right? Where did that $1 million come from? Was that just out of the air, or?
well, I think, Mr. Rogers, did you have an estimate on that,
No.
or was that just a?
Madam
No,
Chair,
that was,
So,
what we were thinking when we were given the 2.5 million was we set $1 million aside for grants, then we set $1 million aside for broadband, and then we set aside $500,000 for projects. Well, then we went looking for projects. Then we went looking for grants. And so that was just a rough estimate at the start. Broadband is one of the biggest problems in the county that needs to be solved. It's business related, it's personal related, it's education related. This is money that could solve that.
Madam
and
Chair.
so we just threw a number at it.
wait a minute, hold on, Mr. Rogers, Mr. Ayers.
Madam Chair, Mr. Rogers, my understanding, I haven't heard it verbatim from administration, but some of the money that's been allocated for the school system, that is a target they're working on, is broadband and education in the county. So we probably need to do some communication there to make sure we are not crossing each other's path when it comes to broadband, because I think that is a big emphasis based on the need for online education for our kids from this COVID-19. So do we need, on the county side, to allocate $1 million, or should we communicate with the school to see what they're doing as far as broadband and trying to work toward their students being able to do online? I think that probably needs to be some discussion there, so we're not crossing paths with each other.
I talked to the superintendent this morning because I've heard the same thing that you've heard, Mr. Ayers. And they have gone forward with some plans. Their plans are just student-specific, making the schools places where the students can go. When I said that to the superintendent, I said, I would like to see us work together on this versus y'all go off and do your thing and then thinking we're gonna go off and do our thing. So I'm right with you there. Mr. Rogers, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. I'd like to take a minute to tell you all where we are at in working together on this. And that is the schools receive their COVID money can be applied toward distance learning. And so what they have done is they have hired a contractor to begin working on a plan and their money, by the way, is good for 3 years. Okay, they are not under this 6-month restriction that we are. So I learned that, you know, the superintendent was directed by the school board to develop a plan to reach all the kids so that they could do their homework. And so we got on a conference call with their contractor, and we asked their contractor, is it possible to expand the plan to cover the entire county? Of course it is. That would cost more, of course, because it's a bigger effort. And so what we have actually done is put out an RFP. We have already received 2 responses to the RFP to develop a plan on how we could deploy to 100% broadband across the county. And we're going through a selection process on that. My initial reaction with the school board was that we should work in tandem together. Because our money is only good for 6 months, my suggestion was that we use our COVID money to pay for the plan, which won't be delivered till the end of September or early October. And that would allow the school's money to be not directed at a plan, but since their money lasts for 2 or 3 more years, that would leave them with more money to apply toward construction. So we were working under a deadline. Of course, at that time, we didn't have a salary switch option, which we do now. But we are working together, and there are some procurement challenges that we got that I don't want to address in an open meeting with the way the schools have moved forward. And so we are going through the process correctly, and we want to help them come up with a plan. I was also assuming that the board would want to devote resources toward fixing broadband, and that we, as I said, we would pay for the plan that covers the schools and the whole county, because our money had a shorter lifespan than theirs. Now, if the board doesn't want to do that, then I just have to inform the schools that, you know, they're on their own.
Hold on, Mr. Martin.
One of the challenges that we have.
Mr. Rogers, or is Mr. Martin trying to speak?
I want to be very clear to the public and everyone in this room. I don't think anyone on this board is saying they do not support improving internet service in Amherst County, right?
No.
Right.
I think, definitely, but what I think we are saying is just taking $1 million and trying to throw at something between now and December might not be the wise thing to do. And I would hope certainly that a plan is not going to cost $1 million, right? So what is a little bit more reasonable number that we need to spend between now and December on broadband? If you can tell me with a straight face that it's $1 million, great. If not, what's the real number?
I can't tell you that number. What we have done, in addition to going out for bids on a plan, we've met with SCS, and we're in the process of identifying locations in the county for additional towers or poles or fiber would be helpful. And identifying whether it's a tower or pole or fiber, and identifying what type of equipment that would be useful on that tower or pole. And we don't even, that's the problem, is we've only got, again, at the time, we only had 6 months in which to figure that out and let the contract and have it be installed. And so we're still trying to compile that information. And I'm as nervous about it as all the rest of you are. It's just trying to spend that much money that fast. I'm fearful that we were going to do something unwise with it and don't want to be unwise with it.
So, right, and SCS is one service provider. I think what would be wise is to look at, start having conversations with multiple service providers that are in the county. And, maybe put their heads together and say, okay, this is how we can improve broadband across the county, instead of just putting our eggs in one basket.
But I think that's what what was it, Lit Communities or something like that? That's the plan. Because I have the same concerns, because I believe that 10 years from now, we're going to have a whole lot of unused towers. Because everybody built a tower, and towers going to be outdated technology.
Right.
And let me make it clear that we're not using SCS. We're using their information. I mean, they don't build towers. We're not going to hire them to build any of these towers, but they know who are their current customers. They know who has applied for service and they don't yet have a tower in place. And they have that data. So we simply ask them to look at their map and show us where we would put something. And then we would go out for another bid for tower companies or fiber companies and ask them, what would it cost to get something in this location? SCS is not a part of that and doesn't get that money.
Okay, so I would think what would be reasonable is, let's say we set aside, and we're just pulling wild numbers out of the air right now. Set aside $500,000 for broadband, right? And, go off and do the plan with that. Then that helps start moving towards putting infrastructure in place, work with the schools, because the broadband is, it's very important for us to have broadband out there for our children. I know all about that. My kids were trying to do classes at home and our internet is not very good. But it's also, once the infrastructure and the service is there, it's not like it's just going to be used by school children. It's going to be available for people to telework, which is kind of the stuff we're talking about right now. It's going to be available for business development. Okay, but let's set aside that money. Okay, $500,000 or whatever the board decides. We're going. Hopefully, we could agree that could be spent within 6 months, maybe, and then set aside another 250 or 3.
You're out of money.
You're
out of money.
Wow. I'm at 1.3. I only started at 500,000.
Well, you all had 1.2 in salaries and then another 600 in
650 in grants.
Oh, I'm offering friendly suggestions. So
Okay.
You didn't make that motion. No, I did not.
Well, we were running down the total and I was like, oh, wait a minute, we're at 2.5.
Yeah, if you go, definitely. I would say set aside 500 for broadband, 3 or so for the grants, and let's see how that goes, see if we can actually spend that. The EDA, how much did you put out in grants last time?
25,000 wasn't very much.
It didn't touch.
What we found was that for many of them, the leases were much higher than we even realized, and so it was a scratch on the surface. We've actually had probably a handful of businesses that have called because they've heard in the media and stuff that there's grants maybe being talked about, and all the other localities are talking about business grants, not so much nonprofit, but business grants. And so they've been calling and saying, we've heard that there's a grant. When is that? When can we go for that? So there are a lot that are really waiting and they're hoping to get their foot in the door quickly on that. If we get the community development block grant, and we don't know exactly when that'll come in, that would be 500,000. That would get used for small businesses under 20. But, you know, we do have some businesses who are over 20 who have suffered a lot of economic injury, and there are, you know, more employees that are being supported through some of this business.
Do you have any sense of how much funding you would need in grants to offset? I mean, obviously, you have to have your finger on kind of the pulse of this. I mean, how much damage or have these companies received?
I think there could be a lot of money given out. Clearly, that 500,000, I think we could probably do another 300,000 beyond it, because the 500,000 can only be used for very specific purposes like rent relief and mortgage relief for 3 to 6 months and some public utilities, whereas the CARES Act money allows for inventory and some of these other areas that aren't covered. So they actually complement each other in many ways. So, you know, for those that have really been hit hard, it's not like the injury happened in the first quarter, February, March, April. It continues to haunt restaurants, bars, you know, who started and now it's going back, and then it's back and forth. So they're still wobbling in July, you know, and they're just, we don't know when this is going to change.
Absolutely. So we could do, so you could do 5 for broadband, 500 in grants for now, and then if that money runs out, we can always go back and look at the 1.2 if we need to. And then that leaves, what, 300,000 in these other projects, right? So
1.2 and 500 in grants is 1.7.
and another 500 in broadband
Is 2.2.
so that leaves roughly 300,000, right?
And, yeah, you want 500 divided between all three, right?
He was at 650, I'm at 5.
Okay, I'm working it down here.
If I could ask one question, you said that DSS said the individual grant, they weren't getting a lot of requests for it, and that the governor put in the regional pot with interfaith outreach. Do we need that big a pot for individual compared to for-profit and non-profit?
My only fear in my thinking is that, that pot that the governor has is being divided across the whole state. And I don't know yet how much interfaith outreach is getting and how much will be allocated to Amherst County per se. I've left a message, I just haven't talked to them yet. So I don't know, I really don't know how much to put towards the individual or if you want to put any.
I think we have a consensus of what we want to do as far as allocating the expenses. I think businesses should have to take a priority over nonprofits or individuals because they most likely been the hardest hit. And then administering these grants and the cost to administer them and how much extra work that will be for Ms. Hanson, I don't know. I mean, that's a lot of work to go through all that and to validate and to make sure the money's going and it's not wrought with fraud and other things where people are just throwing numbers at you. So it's going to take a lot of work on your part to have to divvy up that much money, 500,000, to make sure it goes to the people that need it. So
I would, so just for the sake of moving things along, I would say 500 in grants, 500 set aside for broadband. I would then take, I think the 200,000 for duct cleaning is reasonable. The 60,000 for the shelter system.
That's 80.
Okay, 80. And then, well, it was 2.5 and some change, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so, and then the PPE supplies and the Monroe Hospital warranty. Because you've got $100,000 up there for teleworking, well, you guys have been teleworking for the past 3
Okay, so
months,
we still
right?
need the 6, well, no, not everybody can telework because we don't have the laptops for people.
Well, what were they doing for the past 3 months then? I mean,
They were
was it a
rotating
year?
in my office, they were rotating every day,
So
get their work done and keep everything going.
they were rotating.
I'm the only one that has a
Or they
laptop.
were using their home computers.
Okay.
So we have to pay those actual COVID expenses too, so,
this is, these right here, this 58.9, 20,900 has already been spent. I would say about 10 of that 18 has already been spent. And if we don't fix the sanitary situation at this shelter, we're gonna have to do it in the county anyway.
Right,
It's a no-win over there right now.
Well, yeah, that's
So
good.
this has to come out too, is all I'm saying.
But we don't, I mean, we've already expended the solid waste and the COVID related costs, right?
Right, but if I take it out of here, then I don't really leave you money in the general fund. And we didn't have the money to pay, I've got to find that comp time money if we don't use COVID money.
I think we've got an idea of what we want to do. Like Mr. Martin said, if you come to the conclusion that that $1.2 million, some of it is needed for additional grants to businesses, and we find that that's a good resource for it, we can certainly appropriate more of that money as we go along.
Right, but that gives us time. If it comes back that, okay, we really need more for broadband, because broadband's important, please don't go out in the news saying that Tom Martin doesn't think it is, because I do, okay? You know, but at least when we come to that point where we know what the plan forward is to improve broadband, we'll have a pile of money over there to spend, right? You know, if we come to the point where we know our businesses are hurting and we need to put more in grant money, we'll have that pile of money and we can actually take more than an hour or 40 minutes to think about how to do it. So I think what I just offered for my colleagues' consideration would be 500 for broadband, 500 in grants, then look at the shelter, the duct cleaning and the hot water.
All right, those three, then plus the other, the duct cleaning and the hot
I
water.
mean, you need to add that up. and see.
Yeah, just.
I think you're close. I think you're real close. I think it's a good place to start. Mr. Rogers, make sure I've got it right, but I've got $1 million, right at 1.5, not quite 5, a little over 2.5. Are you on?
I'm not, I didn't add
Okay, so we've got,
project.
the
Duct cleaning, shelter, the Monroe hot water in there.
yeah, and then the reimbursable expenses, and then we'll do the 1.2 salary switch.
Well, here's something we can still use some help with, and that is, do you want to do individual grants?
Yeah.
And I hear the board say that they want to do more for business than nonprofit. Okay. So are we dividing that 500 up 2 ways or 3 ways? We need help with that.
How long does the unemployment and the stimulus last? When does that turn off?
Oh, the extra unemployment ends the 15th of this month.
But wasn't there talk about extending that, or be not?
It has not happened.
Is that gonna happen?
It has not happened yet.
I think we have a social safety net for individuals already built into our system. That's my take.
So tell me more about what the individual grant would be used for.
It was strictly meant before the governor came out with his eviction and mortgage help, was to help with eviction and past due mortgages and past due utility bills. What we're finding amongst the other finance directors is everyone has been under the guidelines, had to stop cutoffs and late fees and that kind of stuff. Well, if you flip that switch in your system, now you've got lots of people that haven't been able to pay their bills that are now in the cutoff. And they're I know that I got a letter from ACSA that they're working with that idea of how to fix that. But if we could help them catch up their utility bills, that was a big thing. Interfaith Outreach may be able to do that. They offer that service.
We had roughly, at its peak, we had roughly, what, 1,300 people unemployed in Amherst County, or somewhere around that?
Yes. We're down to 944 last week.
Okay, so if all 1,300 of those had $1,000 mortgage payment that they could have made,
$130,000?
$130,000, right? You see my point? I
I
mean,
understand what you're saying.
so set aside $100,000 for individual, $200,000 for,
Businesses and nonprofits.
$100,000 for nonprofits, and $300,000 for business. As a start, I'm just offering suggestions. And then if you don't need it all for individuals, roll it over into the other.
We will revisit this regularly because you have the potential of getting the
This is about-
town money back too. Because if they can't spend it, it comes back to us to spend. Just an FYI, because that's $190,000 that we may have to do something with too.
And EDA, please keep us posted on your grant. You know, I think that's very important information to know whether or not you get that 500,000. If you don't get that 500,000, then we might have to revisit some of this stuff. But I think right now, this would put us in a fairly good place.
What do you, so you're saying 300, 100, and 100? Does that equate with you,
Yeah, that's fine.
Mr. Ayers? Ms. Tucker? Sure. I don't know if we'll even spend the 100 on the individuals, I really don't. I mean, it's so up in the air right now. We're just trying to get guidelines to set up the applications and that kind of stuff.
Okay, so there's a bit of a complication now in that the grant program that we set up for nonprofits had a category for Amherst County only nonprofits
That's true.
who typically receive more than $1 million in revenue each year. You know, we're thinking Sweetbriar here. Their total grant that they would have been allowed was up to $100,000. Well, the system that we set up, I mean, we got to rethink the system now, Stacy. Because if there's only $100,000, it can't go to one nonprofit.
No, we can't.
Well, but I think that that's something that the board probably did not contemplate in these discussions. Where do we leave Sweetbriar? Leave them with
Right.
nothing? We sit on all the
Because
money, leave them with nothing.
They're not,
Did they not get
I
CARES
thought
Act?
they just said they got their own federal funds.
They got $100,000.
I do know that that's supposed to be used to help supplement the students.
That's all they got, 100,000.
Yeah. Yeah, and they spend money creating an infirmary and
Not
doing
yet.
some other things.
Not yet.
Yeah.
If I might say something too, I will say Sweetwater College has a huge economic impact on Amherst County. So they are not a for-profit business, but as one of the larger employers in the county, they do have a large economic impact footprint. So we consider them a really key business or nonprofit for our businesses and for the community because of their economic impact.
I don't think anybody's debating this, yet they've been closed down, right?
I mean, the students.
The students haven't been there, right? They're opening back up in the fall, is what I read.
They're gonna be the first school to open back up, I think, in August.
Right. So. They just get tired and shut the door.
Really?
I'm sorry, that was me letting the dog out.
I would maybe suggest so that you can help some of the other nonprofits.
And let me please remind the board again, we're not shooting for 1.3 million, we're shooting for over that. Because
Some of this stuff.
you need to give us authority to spend more than that, because we are gonna come in less.
So let me suggest this. 300 in business, 150 in nonprofit, and 50 an individual. That still gives you the same number. I mean, if you're leaning where you want to do more, and of course, Sweetbriar is going to be in that top category, and we take all the money in the nonprofit category right now, possibly. Then you may want to shift some. Just a suggestion, just a thought process on the numbers. Because I have no idea how many we're going to have apply.
I mean, I've had a long conversation with the president, but I don't know if anybody else here has or not. And they are a significant entity in this county. I think it's certainly, it's noble of us to want to keep this money and put it aside for the future. I don't disagree with that move. But, and I can say the same thing for our churches. Our churches have been under attack. Do we not want to support them if we can?
So you're suggesting maybe reduce the salary switch?
I'm advocating a little bit more than nonprofits.
Okay, so you're reduce the salary switch percent, like that.
But not so much that, and quite frankly, I would say less to the individuals and more to the businesses and nonprofits. Because the nonprofits are helping the individuals. Many of them are the churches and
True.
yeah.
I understand what you're saying.
And they're doing the weeding out, the screening for, so we don't have to do it.
So you're saying take the individual piece out, just do business as a nonprofit?
Yeah, and if we see that there's a need that we don't see right now, then we can go back and revisit that.
And please, getting it, so to Mr. Pugh's point, isn't that what we have Department of Social Services for, if individuals need help on things like that?
I'm not disagreeing with you, that's why I just said that I think the money needs to go elsewhere.
So, okay, so you're saying 3 and 2.
I didn't get you.
300,000 for businesses, 200,000 for nonprofits.
Sure, yeah. Does anybody, Ms. Moore, how do you feel about that?
No, I'm fine with that. I mean, I think you're right, churches are welcome people, but there are other avenues for individuals to seek opportunities.
Mr. P, you okay with that?
Yeah, I mean, everybody in this county that got a $3,400 check from the government not that long ago as well. You know, I mean, there's been a lot of help going around.
Just
Well,
say
if you're
everybody-
married with children, you got $3,400. Yeah, that's what I got on a debit card.
So,
Still good.
Yeah, so.
so we are eliminating the individual grant per se, and let me suggest that I'll still connect with Interfaith Outreach, and if they find a need for our citizens, they can contact us.
What else do we have to decide?
We'll bring it back to the board if that's the case.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, it's not like, that way we can still revisit it, like you said. But I'll make that contact and we'll try to get that information out to individuals as well so that they know where to go. No, I think you've got it. You got grants at 500, broadband at 500, ductwork at 200, shelter at 80, 60,000 in other expenses, 1.2 in the salary switch, and the 3,500 in unroad hot water. Right now, that's where we're at.
I mean, I'll say, is this right? Is this the best way to spend the money? It's such a hard decision to do in such a short period of time. We're trying to do the
Very
best
hard.
we can, and
All right, but is there anything left over that we haven't? So everything else, there's still that bucket of money there, but we move it into 2021 or whenever.
Correct. I spent some of it. So, yeah, out of 2020, so I'm making that split.
Okay. What else do you need from us?
I would
make a motion to appropriate the CARES Act funds. How did
Look at the motion that you've been given. And you
Yeah,
can just
I
change
think
the
there's
number.
one on there somewhere.
All right, who wants to make the motion and plug in the right numbers? Ms. Moore, do you have it in front of you?
Yeah, me.
I mean, you have the numbers in front of you, so I'm asking.
I can help you if you need.
All right,
Madam Chair, I move that the board designate funding for public safety salaries in the amount of up to 1.2 million. Business grants in the amount of up to
300,000,
300,000. Nonprofit grants in the amount of up to
200,000.
200,000. Individual grants,
No.
at this time, nothing. Reimbursement of cost expanded in the amount of 58.9.
Yeah.
And other qualifying projects as prioritized and as remaining funds allow until the appropriated CARES Act funds are expended.
785,000. So that's what's left, so. Of your overage.
all right, there's a motion on the floor by Mr. Ayers. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion passes.
That included the 500 for broadband.
Yes.
That's 17.
Okay, so we didn't need to spell out the 785.
No, you didn't have to.
Correct.
All right, next we've got the updated compensation plan.
Yes, Madam Chair. This is for the benefit for the employees. It's provided by Nationwide. We simply give them a portion of our salary and they invest it, and it's our IRA with them. There's no cost to the county, but they do have a contract with the county to manage this for our employees. It is time to renew that contract, and without any changes to it, I'm asking for approval from the board to sign it and continue our relationship with Nationwide.
Board members, any questions? All right, is there a motion?
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve the updated deferred compensation plan as presented and direct the county administrator to sign the adoption agreement.
Motion on the floor by Mr. Ayers. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Thank you. Next, we've got Mr. Rogers, broadband update.
Yes.
I think we beat that horse.
Hey, yes, ma'am, and a couple of housekeeping things, if I could first. One is, I'm trying to narrow down a retreat date in August. I only received a response from the chair. I was proposing Mondays in August. If you all can give me a date, we can begin planning for that, since it's only a month away at this point. I needed a Monday in August on which you can all gather.
Can y'all do that right now?
The 10th is out for me, so it looks like the rest of them are okay.
I can do the third, or the 10th.
10th is out.
Oh, yeah. I can do the 3rd or the 31st.
How about 30? So that would mean we have a meeting on Wednesday, that next day, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. How about the 24th?
I mean, I can, yeah. Does the 24th work for everybody? Works for me. Yes, Mr. Ayers? All right, the 24th it is.
Okay, thank you all. The next item is with regard to a new vehicle that's needed in building inspection. It was on the supplemental budget, and you all approved that, but you moved it down below the cut line, saying wait until we knew whether our revenues would be sufficient for it. Safety, we need that vehicle. We need to replace the vehicle. The one that we have is in the garage too much. And I'm asking for you all to allow us to expend that money now and not wait till the fall.
Do you have the money now?
So what you all? What
Go
you
ahead,
all-
Stacy.
What you all decided when you did the supplemental was to wait 3 months before we did any of the projects. This was on the project list, but we weren't gonna spend any money until then. We have had a vehicle in the shop for probably more of the last 2 months than out, and it takes about 3 months to get it ordered and here. So we would like to go ahead and place the order. Yes, I mean, the money is in the budget for the supplemental, we just weren't taking action on any of those until after our first review. But we.
And at this point in time, we're
Do
not,
order.
you know, revenues are
Yeah,
holding their own, if not up.
we were only down 14% in meals tax last month, and we almost set a record in sales tax. We were 7% off of our Christmas sales tax. Almost 300.
Which overcame the reduction in the meal
Yeah.
tax.
I mean, for all purposes, our revenues are about where they should be regardless of the pandemic.
And I'm gonna stick by what I said when we were doing the budget. I'm not gonna vote for anything to come out of the unobligated because we have a tight budget.
No, this is already in the budget. It's just, we're just not spending it until you all tell us to.
Board members, what's your pleasure?
So this was accounted for in all of the
Yes, it's in the
budget
budget.
numbers, we just told you to hold off spending, I remember that.
Yes.
Technically, you gave us approval, by putting it in the budget, you gave us approval to expend the money. But we
did.
told you that we would not until we came back.
We did, it's in the budget, we just asked them to pump the brakes a little bit before they went out and started spending it, right?
Correct.
So it sounds like that it's in the budget, your projections are actually much better than you had anticipated. So probably okay to, we're not asking for anything new to go into the budget.
Correct.
All right, do you just need direction?
Yes, we just need
Do you need a
to,
motion? Okay, do you feel like you got your sense of direction?
everybody's okay with it?
Yes.
Okay. So
Okay.
Barbara,
that
you
helps.
order your vehicle.
Mr. Rogers, do you have anything else?
Well, I just wanted to touch on broadband again, just so that I understand. So the board has set aside $500,000. If we go forward with the plan that would pay for us and the schools, I think we're looking at about $60,000 for that. If we can identify locations where we can put up more towers and poles, and we can, and that can fall within the $500,000. In order for that to happen, I need to move very quickly with the procurement process. And I just kind of want the board to say that's okay to proceed.
Who's gonna identify these places?
Who's identifying this? We're using SCF to identify where we need whatever types of equipment that would help increase, to expand the coverage of the county. And just in terms of technology, you can put two towers right next to each other and increase the capacity, because you can only put about 100 people on a tower. And so having more towers allows more data to be shared and propagated. And so whether we put up towers or whether we put fiber in the ground or whether we just put up poles in neighborhoods, in order for that to happen, it has to happen very quickly. And I just want to get the board's okay that we can move quickly to expend that money if we can find something. I mean, we're moving to fill the gaps. There are places in the county where there is no service. And we've identified pieces of property that are county owned and some that are privately owned, that the owners are willing to have some sort of equipment put on their land. And I just want the board to understand that we're gonna have to move very, very quickly to make that happen.
Mr. Martin,
Yeah, so what I just heard you say is you needed to spend about $60,000 to do this study. So then the next thing that you said was you're going to use SCS broadband to do the study. Right,
No.
That's not what you meant to say?
This
Okay.
is the study that will take into account all of the county's existing internet resources and opportunities for grants and what's out there that will serve the schools and businesses. Won't be finished until about October.
Right, but
So if we wait until October before we try to go start to build towers, there's no way that they can be finished by the end of the year.
I get that.
So the idea is to identify places right now where we know we could use towers, where we could use fiber, where we could use a pole. Identify those, identify the equipment that's needed, put it out for bid, and then hire somebody to install that equipment, to construct that tower if necessary in that location.
All right, Mr.
That's
Rogers, stop.
information.
Mr. Rogers.
I get all of that. So what I'm hearing you say is there's really two pieces to this. One, there's a study, and what I believe the chair asked is who you were going to get to do that study. I'm guessing you're going to put out an RFP and get proposals in to do the study. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right,
That
so-
RFP has already gone out and the proposals are already in. They haven't yet been selected. Mr. Crawford can talk to that. I think he's there in the room.
Right, so
What I'm talking about is something that needs to happen before we even get the plan.
and so the next thing I heard you say was that the remaining $440,000 is you want to go out and work with SCS Broadband to put up towers. I have an issue with that because SCS Broadband is not the only company that services Amherst County. So you need to be talking to the other providers in Amherst County before you exclusively go and spend $440,000 with them. Now, if anybody else on the board disagrees with that, that's fine, but I personally take issue with that. They are not the only internet provider in Amherst County. So you should at least be talking to some of the other ones, like Infinisky, whomever else is out there.
Yes, sir, we can certainly do that. We don't intend to hire FCF to put this equipment up. We do intend to put it out for bid. But the challenge that we have, of course, is time, but we have the advantage that we've been working with FCS for so long. As I said earlier, they know where there is no signal. They know where there is signal. They know where there are customers that are not being served.
On their network.
And some of those are no-brainer identifications.
They know where.
Companies like Sciontech does not have that information. They have not been working with it. They do have a few customers in the county, but they don't have the broad reach. We're happy to contact them and get their input.
Absolutely. Because I do not think you should just solely go to one provider and say, where do you need to put a tower to improve your network? You should start talking to the other companies out there before you do that. I realize SCS is not going to build the tower, okay? But you should at least be talking to the other companies and getting their input before you clearly just go spend $440,000 to support one company.
Yes, sir, got it.
And in your study, in your research, you're also gonna check out things that are not tower related, but more fiber, such as what, Central Virginia Electrical, CVEC is doing.
Yes, ma'am, that's actually our preference, to think of something longer term. The challenge is that the Treasury only lets us put into place that which can actually go into service by 30 December.
Right, I understand, just don't turn a blind eye to it because it is the future. Anyway, I think that, is there anything else that you need from us on the broadband? Do you need a motion?
No, ma'am, no.
Mr. Martin, did you get all your concerns addressed?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Anything else on broadband?
No, ma'am.
It's just the fact that, you're gonna have to hold public hearings to locate these towers. I mean, it's gonna be a complicated process. 6 months is a short period of time. It's gonna be hard to do. That's all I'm saying.
Yes, sir, it will be.
All right, Mr. County Attorney?
I think we've heard enough from staff.
Yes.
Bless you. All right, liaison committee reports, I think they're self-explanatory. Departmental, Mr. Bryan.
All right, tough act to follow. Good evening, Madam Chair, board members, department members, and Mr. Rogers. So, Amherst County Public Safety, we're here to speak to you about us tonight. I think you know what our mission is. Basically, we take care of you when no one else does. We respond to emergencies, no matter whether it's very simple or very complicated. We come together as a team always. We enjoy that in Amherst County. Not every county does that, I'll remind you of that, but we do a great job of that. I can call on at any one of these guys or girls, the volunteer fire department, some rescue squad members. They're few of those guys left for public safety, and they're going to be there for you. So we have 4 divisions. The call comes in at our 911 center, not even a mile away from here. That's where the magic happens. I'll remind you that we're now ready. We're practicing Texas Talk. We're already validating that. We've been compliant with that. And we're testing that so people that are hearing impaired or locked in the closet, they can text and get help, and we can speak with them silently. And in the future, we'll be able to receive pictures from them. Emergency medical services, trucks never stop. You see the red trucks. I've got a great group of young people here that are doing awesome work. They're learning along the way. They're passing the ball and catching big touchdowns now. We've saved some lives recently, done some really good stuff. Proud of them. Emergency management, that's where your EOP comes in. That's where we deal with tornadoes, floods, COVID-19, all those fun things that no one wants to think about, but we have to have a plan for. And they do happen. Fire response, a lot of fires going on recently out out there. We do real well with that. Fire marshal duties looked at a fire this morning that Mr. Martin went on. I didn't look at that fire, but I want to look at that fire over there and fire again. So I'm good at figuring out what happened with it. It was accidental fire. Most fires are accidental, but there are a few out there that aren't. And it takes a lot of hours to work on those when we get to the courtroom. We've got 33 full-time employees right now. I'm missing 3 paramedics working on the job description. We've got the job description working on the way people can apply for jobs here. We have recruited 1 part-timer that I hope will become a full-timer, very talented paramedic. But people are starting to talk about our salary and the support we got from you guys, and there's some interest there. And I want to hire the right people. I want people that are going to stay here, do the right thing for you, whether it's 2 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon, whether everyone's looking or no one's looking. That's what I mean. We have had a bunch of part-time people that have saved us, and thank you guys for including them in the COVID funding and the CARES Act, so we took care of them. And they have really made the difference for us, and got us through this until I can get things going. That's pretty much it. 3 slides, quick. What questions do you have of me? I'll be glad to answer anything you have on your mind.
Remembers anything?
Tom's got something on his mind. He's got that smile on his face. Oh, yeah. Oh, all right. Well, thank you for having
Well, I
us.
just want to say, we had an incident in our house last week, and the public safety came to our house, and I was scared to death. Can't remember last time I was that scared. And I got treated like anybody else in this county, and it was superior performance. Thank you.
You're welcome. Appreciate that.
All right, board members, Treasurer's monthly report, that's for your information. Citizens comment, anyone here wishing to speak? Seeing and hearing none, we'll close citizen comment and move on to matters from the board. Mr. Ayers.
No, Madam Chair.
Mr. Martin.
Madam Chair, I've been contacted several times from a citizen on Isaac Walton Road about a camper that is seen don't know if they are or not, that someone is using as a secondary unit on the property. I understand that Mr. Bryant, Jeremy Bryant, is working on an ordinance to deal with that. I'd just like to have an update on where we are with that about the next meeting or so, please.
Mr. Rogers, did you hear that? Mr. Rogers?
I'm making a note.
Okay, thank you. I'll make that call. All right, Mr. Pugh,
Nothing, Madam Chair.
Ms. Moore,
I have nothing.
and I have nothing either. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion on the floor by Ms. Moore. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Mr. Martin, I can call you and give you an update. Sorry, I had my mute on.
I appreciate that. Thank you, sir.